Man, we already lost.
Thanks so much for joining this session on cutting-edge sensors, innovations in hydrogen emissions detection and measurement. My name is Morgan Rote, and I'm a Director of U.S. Climate Policy at the Environmental Defense Fund. At every hydrogen conference I attend, I hear more and more talk about hydrogen emissions and the importance of detection and mitigation. We've all heard it several times today. Why is that? Well, chemists have known for a while that hydrogen is a slippery molecule. It's hard to hold on to. Operators have known they need to pay attention to large leaks so they don't waste valuable product, or worse, have a safety incident on their hands. And more recently, atmospheric researchers have reached a consensus that hydrogen has a substantial climate warming impact in the near term, which can erode hydrogen's climate benefits that we so desperately need. But the most exciting piece of the puzzle is that we're starting to see some real technological breakthroughs in this space. Over the last couple of years, the Department of Energy has committed more than $30 million to hydrogen detection, and more companies are developing new solutions that span from the most precise of instruments, a sensor measuring at the parts per billion level, to the most accessible of solutions, a roll of tape that costs just over $100. I'm really looking forward to learning more from this panel. We have with us Christine Watson, Dr. Scott Herndon, and David Pearman. Christine is a technology manager with Department of Energy's Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office. Her work focuses on safety, codes, and standards by supporting activities that enable the safe deployment and commercialization of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. She's a graduate of Oklahoma State University with an MS in Materials Science and Engineering. Scott is a principal scientist at Aerodyne Research and the Center Director for Aerodyne's Center for Atmospheric and Environmental Research. At Aerodyne, Scott has pursued research on chemical kinetics, instrument development, field measurements, and atmospheric modeling on diverse topics. He has his PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Colorado. David Pearman is a detection research engineer with Element 1. David has over 4 years of experience with hydrogen leak detection. While at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, David tested, evaluated, and compared many types of hydrogen sensors and leak detection technologies. As an Element 1 researcher, David works closely with Element 1's leak detection technology as well as industry partners. I'll turn it over first to Christine for an overview of DOE's hydrogen detection work, followed by overviews by Scott and David of their detection solutions, and then we'll dive into a discussion.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Next slide. One more.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We'll give an overview of DOE activities in hydrogen emissions detection. So starting in 2022, HFTO co-led with the European Commission a workshop on the current status of R&D needs regarding the global warming potential of hydrogen. What we found was that there was a need for more data on atmospheric behavior of hydrogen and quantification of hydrogen losses to fully model hydrogen's global warming impact. After the workshop, the JRC published a technical report summarizing the presentations and recommendations of the workshop. The QR code is on the slide there. Last year, HFTO and NOAA started an interagency agreement of $2.2 million over 3 years to better understand hydrogen's cycle, including the sensitivity to man-made anthropogenic emissions and climate change. There are 3 main tasks to this agreement. The first is to improve the best practices for hydrogen's air measurements. On the slide is a map of NOAA's Global Cooperative Air Sampling Network. That is the largest hydrogen measurement network in the world. The second task is analysis and modeling of atmospheric behavior of hydrogen. And the third task is R&D on the soil removal of hydrogen by bacteria and sensitivity of those bacteria to climate change and land use. This work is a collaboration between the University of California, Irvine, NOAA's Global Monitoring Lab, NOAA's Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Lab, and Princeton University. HFTO has a ton of activities in the detection space of hydrogen releases. First off, looking at the National Lab R&D, we have work at the National Renewable Energy Lab looking at sensors and advanced leak detection. That does include modeling of hydrogen releases at the Ares site in collaboration with NOAA for background air sampling measurements. NREL has also upgraded the safety sensor testing apparatus for parts per billion level detection for ppb level sensors. We also have work going on at Sandia National Lab looking at hydrogen and blends release behavior. Last year, we selected 8.6 million in FOA projects to develop parts per billion level sensors to detect small scale leaks. 3 of those were with universities and 3 of those with private companies. Last year, we also started 2 small business projects in phase 1 on the quantification of hydrogen releases. That includes Aerodyne, where Scott is speaking next, as well as Solve Technology and Research. We have a technology commercialization fund to also develop parts per billion level sensors with Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And finally, we have a cooperative research and development agreement that is an agreement between a national lab and industry. And this one's with NREL looking at hydrogen wide area monitoring. There are 4 kinds of detection technologies that are being studied under this CRADA. That includes ultrasonic detection, Schlieren imaging, fiber optic sensors, as well as networked point sensors. One project I want to highlight is the Hydrogen Component Reliability Database. This is a great opportunity for industry to partner with DOE. DOE has been asked many times, how can industry get involved? We've also heard calls from environmental groups for increased transparency on component reliability data. Through this project called the HyCred project, we pair the 2. So it is a way for industry to have secure and anonymous data collection partnered with DOE to then make that data publicly accessible. Another way that people can get involved with us is the Hydrogen Shot Fellowship. We have an opening in the Safety Codes and Standards team that I am on, as well as on the Environmental Justice team. So if you have anyone in mind or you're interested in this, please come talk to me afterwards. Highlighting, I don't have a pointer, couple more opportunities for industry involvement. The Center for Hydrogen Safety, the link is on the slide. That is a great opportunity for industry if you're interested in safety opportunities. Also want to highlight our HFTO newsletter. If we get asked constantly, what is the best way to know about upcoming events, workshops, or funding opportunities, please sign up for our newsletter. That is where I typically find out what's going on because there's so much going on in our office. This is the best way to find out. And I will pass it to Scott.
Cool. Thanks, Christine. So Morgan asked me to prepare a slide to talk about the instrument program that Christine mentioned to show how the instrument works. But before I do, if I can just do that, I'm going to start just to mention something that I think this slide really sets up the next slide. And it is basically saying you can do sort of standoff detection of a facility if you've got enough, a nice, good, sensitive measurement. If you only have that measurement, you will probably employ some type of inversion technique, be it a Gaussian plume model or OTM33 or other types of approaches. And in that approach, you use, of course, the measurement data, but you use some model of the atmosphere to show you what extent of dilution has taken place. And that's how you work back to an emission rate. An approach that things like the EDF natural gas study, ARPA-E monitor, RIPSI program has also used this tracer flux ratio. And in this type of approach, what you do is you deliberately stage a release at the facility, and then you use that as your proxy for the dilution model. And this helps remove a lot of the uncertainty. The problem with this is that it's a bit pricey, and so you've got to have somebody doing the release. You've got to have the luck of being that far downwind. So while it's got some advantages, it often is not employed, and you use more sophisticated inversion techniques when you've just got that monitor. And I think that'll be the basis of what we end up discussing a little bit later, but I wanted to bring this in. We used the experience with this as the requirement as we tried to design this instrument, this scheme to detect hydrogen. And this is it. Basically, Mother Nature's unkind. We talked about hydrogen being a little slippery. It's also invisible in the infrared. And the whole technique is predicated on converting that hydrogen into something that's really strong and bright in the infrared, and that's water. You'll see from this scheme that there's a lot of effort on that front end to exclude any of the ambient water. So it's really a water management coupled with a hydrogen converter, the way that works. And if you want to get me excited, ask me questions about how this works, and I'm happy to answer those. I will go ahead and put just the specifications that the instrument is achieving here for you to look at and read. I'm eager to talk about this a bit later. I think it's time to pass it on to David.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Scott. All right. Sweet. So yeah, I'm David Pearman. I work for Element 1. This one. All right, there you go. Work for Element 1. We specialize in hydrogen leak detection. First, I'll get into our founder and the president, which is Bill Hoagland. Some of you guys may know him. He's been around for quite a while, working with the DOE and industry with the hydrogen. So he's been around for a little over 40 years. He's previously the hydrogen program manager at NREL. As I said, I'm David Pearman, there on the right, detection research engineer. I've got a little over 4 years of hydrogen leak detection research under my belt. Some of that is with Element 1, obviously, working with our technology, and then some of it as well is at NREL, where I was formerly a research engineer, getting to work with a lot of the technologies that Christina talked about. So overall, we've got, at Element 1, we've got a strong technical side of things, and we're starting to grow the business side as well. It's getting quite strong, so we're becoming a well-rounded company. So if we take a step back and think about the big picture and kind of the road that leak detection technology takes from the lab to industry, we see this as technology is initially kind of funded, typically by the Department of Energy, developed and tested in laboratories. Once it's been proven there, eventually it's going to get bumped up to these test facilities, which I'll give a shout out to NREL here. We've got the Aries facility there in Colorado. It's a great test facility. So we can validate the sensors there, and then once it's in industry, that's whenever people kind of start thinking about making it cost effective, making sure it's easily implementable and applicable to industry. Whereas our take, we really try to think of step 3 there in industry, and we try to think about it in the very beginning. Whenever we're developing these technologies and working on funding, we really try to make things low cost, practical, kind of right from the very beginning. So some of our products. So we have Detect Tape is there on the left. So it is a self-fusing silicone tape that turns from a light gray to a dark black in the presence of hydrogen. It's a non-reversible reaction, and as you can tell, it's put directly onto the fitting, flange, whatever joint, right at the source of the leak. In that same vein, we have our wireless sensor. So it's very low power or even no power. So that way you can use like passive RFID, Zigbee, Bluetooth, those kind of communication systems. So it works really well for remote leak detection on pipelines. Also being low power, it's useful for like class 1 Div 2 areas, hazardous areas. So we think that our technology, it's simple, it's reliable, and it can be complementary to other proposed leak detection solutions. So as far as kind of our strategy of how we're using this technology, so it can kind of be described there with the picture there on the right. So the part that we're covering is ensuring that there's no significant unintentional hydrogen leaks that go undetected, right? So since we are detecting those hydrogen leaks at the point of the leak, we can make sure that those fugitive emissions are caught, and if it's a significant leak, that leak needs to be fixed. The other leaks, or I'll say other emissions, so we're going to try to quantify and minimize those, so of the known leaks. For example, that could be process vents from electrolyzers, fuel cells, liquid hydrogen boil-off, things like that. So we can try to quantify those and minimize those. So in general, we're trying to widely populate these sensors. Having a wide array of these sensors is going to greatly reduce the chance that a leak goes undetected, right? Some advantages, there's no modeling needed, there's no extensive like field calibrations needed or anything like that. It's kind of deploy it, and then you can let it sit there. Nothing needs to be changed until you have a leaky fitting. Let's see. And then also it's easily transferable from one, how do I say this? From one situation to the next, maybe, you know, large scale, small scale applications, pipelines. Again, the strategy is easily transferable kind of from one system to the next. And then lastly, like we said, it's designed with industry in mind and with industry input. So we try to work closely with industry to make sure the technology we have, it's cheap, it's easy to use, people are actually going to use it, it's not so complicated that it's going to be kind of off-putting. So that is all I had. Do I have? There it is. I did have an extra slide. Okay, so there is a QR code there on the right. Feel free to take a picture of that. It'll take you to our website. That was all I had. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. That was really interesting to learn more about both where DOE is sort of investing its attention and funding, as well as some of the projects that you all have underway. So the first question I want to ask is, why are we doing this? Why is hydrogen emissions detection and measurement so important for building a successful hydrogen economy? Christine, maybe we'll start with you.
I'll go first. The importance is on multiple fronts. I think of it as, from a community perspective, the community is concerned about the safety of hydrogen infrastructure. In that case, we need to be able to detect and mitigate leaks, low-level leaks. From an environmental perspective, we want to mitigate any impacts, any negative impacts of hydrogen on atmospheric climate change. And then from an industrial perspective, that hydrogen, that's a commodity. So losing hydrogen is not optimal for industry. So in all of those fields, it is important.
Scott, what about you?
Yeah, Morgan, I think from my perspective, the literature seems to suggest that we have this understanding of the indirect effect that hydrogen plays on other greenhouse forces in the troposphere. And what's a little bit new and kind of intriguing to me is this reevaluation of the effect that it has on producing water in the stratosphere. It was very startling to me when I first went to graduate school. I learned that the hydrogen that's in the stratosphere came through the tropopause by way of methane and hydrogen. And so putting more water in the stratosphere has that indirect greenhouse effect. And I think it's one of the factors that we are wanting to understand this emission rate before completely adopting the technology.
Yeah. And Dave?
Yeah, so I'll kind of echo what Christine said there. So we've got the money side of things, is that at least at the moment, hydrogen's not cheap, so we don't want to be losing that. There's obviously the safety side of things. Hydrogen's flammable. We don't want safety incidences, things like that. I would say it's relatively new, but now we've realized that it's an emissions concern for the environment. And it seems to me that if we do a good job with the emissions side of things, limiting hydrogen for emissions, that the other ones will kind of work themselves out, right? So if we can take care of all of the leaks for emissions, then leaks as far as safety is concerned, shouldn't be a problem then either, right?
Yeah.
And you're not losing your valuable products. I'll also add that we don't want to make the same mistakes that were made whenever methane was deployed, or natural gas, I should add. So with natural gas coming in as maybe a fuel to make electricity, it came with the promise of not having as many nasty chemicals being put into the atmosphere, which is true with the caveat that we don't leak too much of it, right? And so it would be a good idea to plan ahead and not do that with hydrogen as well.
Yeah.
Let's plan now to not leak hydrogen as we implement it. Right?
Yeah, and one of the things we were talking about earlier is that when we're talking about hydrogen leaks, it's not just fugitive emissions, but there's a lot of operational releases as well. One of you mentioned a couple examples of venting, and
Yep.
Can you just list a few of those of how that plays out in regular day, business operations?
Yeah, so I can just go over the three that I listed. So electrolyzers have process vents, so it doesn't do a perfect job of separating the oxygen and the hydrogen. So some of the hydrogen passes into the oxygen stream. So there's some there. There's just normal kind of process vents that happen. A similar thing is true of fuel cells. So not all of the hydrogen gets used. Some of it comes out of the exhaust, which actually did quite a bit of work at NREL with that. And then liquid hydrogen boil off. It's hard to keep it that cold, and so it boils, and you lose it if you don't use it. So
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the role of government funding. What work is DOE and other government agencies doing to support innovations in hydrogen detection? You listed several of them on your slide, so I don't know if you want to go into more detail, Christine. And then why is this support so helpful from an industry or entrepreneurial perspective?
Yeah, I can, in addition to the many projects we have ongoing, so the DOE ARPA-E program just closed a funding opportunity, just closed for applications last week, and where that really highlights the role of government to me, because ARPA-E is looking at very high risk and low technology readiness level projects. These projects would be too high risk for industry to fund, but then ARPA-E is able to fund those and see where those go. Another example about the role of government is also with the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells in the Economy, IPHE. It's an intergovernmental organization. An international intergovernmental organization is starting a new task force addressing the emissions and environmental impacts of hydrogen, and we are involved in that. And so seeing it from an international government perspective, to really tackle it, because it's not just a US or American problem. It's an opportunity for all the countries to work together to solve it and to optimize hydrogen.
Yeah, definitely. And Dave, you mentioned the Aries facility. You want to talk
Right.
a little bit about, and your experience at NREL is
Yeah.
obviously relevant here. Can you talk about how that has been supportive?
Yeah, so I think, one way that government funding can work out really well, for example, is the Aries facility. So again, Aries facility is part of NREL. It's located just north of Boulder, Colorado, south of Boulder, Colorado, north of Golden, sorry. But yeah, I think that's a really good example of government funding well used. So it's a large test facility. They have something like a 1 megawatt electrolyzer and fuel cell. One's bigger than the other, but they have above ground storage. So they've got production, end use, storage. It's a great test facility for a lot of different things. For example, leak detection. So I think that's a really good thing. Also, just because I came out of NREL, I'll say that government funding is also good. Funding these national labs does help grow people, I'll say, right? To be able to make experienced researchers, experienced technicians to get out into industry and kind of help mend industry and research together.
And Scott, you've benefited from the SBIR program. What role does that play in the sort of innovation pipeline?
Well, yeah, I don't want to miss the opportunity to compliment Christine's program on the SBIR, where I think the focus is also to fund innovative technology, but there might be a little different emphasis than the ARPA-E high risk, high reward, in that really is geared, I mean, you're evaluated on the commercial viability and the commercial plan. So I think the SBIR does give an opportunity to actually bring products to market. And so that's a complementary but valuable plank as well.
Yeah, well, so you just accidentally used a word that I wanted to focus on, of complementarity. And that was in your presentation, Dave. There's a lot of different types of detection technologies. Can you all talk about the different types of sensors and quantification techniques, and how did they fill different market needs? How do all of these things sort of come together to create a detection ecosystem?
Yeah. I can
start, Christine?
Oh.
Yeah, I can start. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution where one technology fits everyone's needs. It could be, like, for example, we have ultrasonic detection that's already in use commercially with other high-pressure gases. Ultrasonic detection detects high-pressure leaks regardless of what kind of gas it is. So it's not specific to hydrogen, and that's great. You can be notified if there's a high-pressure leak. But what if it's not a high-pressure leak? Or what if you need to know, what if you have multiple gases in an area? You need to know which gas is the one that, so it notifies you you've got an issue, or the detect tape for valves, for leaks there. There's different uses, different optimal uses, and by connecting them together and working them together, you can get a better picture and an image of what is happening and what is going on.
Great.
Yeah.
Do either one of you want to add on?
Yeah, I could add on a thought. So my past, like, I kind of got started with hydrogen leak detection as it pertains to safety, right? And so with detection for safety, we have redundancy and complementary leak detection systems already, right? So you've got combustible gas monitors indoors, and if you're going into a hazardous area, you've got a personal monitor clipped to your hip. And from an operational standpoint, you have mass loss alarms. So if the pressure in your tank starts dropping rapidly and you don't know where it's going, it's probably leaking. And so you start closing valves, right? So we've got redundancy for safety. Why do we think emissions would be any different, right? We're going to need kind of an all hands on deck, so to speak, to be able to do this well, I think.
Yeah, and I think that from the, again, complementary approaches, I think there's a lot of value in trying to have that standoff detection capability that says, I'm measuring the emissions from the total site. That helps make sure there aren't unintended emissions that you're missing, perhaps, in a bottom-up count that might take place. And I think that's really important, again, to the topic of doing this greenhouse gas validation or certification.
Right. Being able to sort of quantify the whole picture of emissions.
And then reclassify it in terms of throughput at the facility. Yeah.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little about deployment of these solutions. What are the goals? And you each had slides, but if you can sort of run through the highlights verbally. What are the goals we're trying to reach in terms of cost, accuracy, reliability, et cetera? And this is a two-part question. Once the sensors have demonstrated those, what else is needed in terms of guidelines for use or best practices for deploying the sensors?
You guys want to start?
Yeah, I can start on my end, sure. So I'll actually throw a little plug out to DOE. So there's the hydrogen shot, right? Ultimately we're trying to lower the cost of hydrogen as time goes on, right? And so I think that's where the cost of our technology can really come in. Is, for one, we want our technology to be low cost, right? If it's too expensive, industry isn't going to be buying into it unless they're forced to through codes, which could be the situation. But ultimately, our technology needs to be helping to reduce the cost of hydrogen. in the long run. Also at Element 1, something we talk about is called the Bubba factor. So you've got your engineers and researchers that are developing this technology, and we're really careful whenever we do our experiments and things like that. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, when this is being used in industry, there's going to be some technician or disconnected engineer that's the one that's implementing our technology. And so, that being said, it's a really good idea to try to keep your technology as simple and easy to use. And so I think that's really where it comes down to deployment, and things to keep in mind is being connected to industry. You can ask those questions of, hey, do you think this is easy enough to use? Your technicians will actually do it. So we've talked to one specific green steel manufacturer that told us that exactly. If this is complicated, our technicians just won't do it. And so it's just one of the realities, but something to keep in mind throughout the whole process, right?
Yeah, I think we complement one another well, because we sort of have the opposite mentality in that our version of low cost is still very expensive. Again, we're trying to go for something that really is both fast and sensitive, sensitive enough to pull off that trick of being a standoff detection scheme. And I agree with you completely, but you know, again, in the spirit of wanting to understand the site-wide emissions, I think there is a place for having a fast, sensitive monitor.
And you need that speed and precision to be able to quantify the really small leaks. Is that right?
Small leaks at a distance, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure locating them is tied into that as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Christine, your team has a whole program plan on this.
Yes.
Anything you want to add?
DOE HFTO just released our multi-year program plan at AMR a few weeks ago, and there's a Safety Codes and Standards chapter. I don't think we have the link up here, right?
It's on the app.
Okay, the link is on the app, and there is a table in there that has the detection targets for safety detection technology, safety sensors, but there's another table that has been added that has properties of interest for emissions detection of small leaks. And so that's something that we're kind of vetting out and looking at more closely, are those properties of interest.
Great. Okay, well, my last question, and then audience, start to gather your questions in mind. What are some of the biggest challenges that remain, and how can industry help overcome them?
I can start, because I'm very excited about this. One of the biggest challenges in the near term is data collection. Like I said in my talk, that is one of the needs, one of the R&D gaps, is having more data. And one way the industry can get involved is through the HiCred project that I highlighted in my presentation, where industry can partner with DOE to share their data securely and anonymously, share their data with DOE, and that data will inform safety as well as the analysis of hydrogen emissions. So that's a really big deal. One of the other major challenges in this area is that the majority of hydrogen that is currently being released or expected to be released into the atmosphere are not coming from the small leaks. They're coming from operational releases, the boil off, the purging, the venting that Dave mentioned. And so we need to have more and do more research on the mitigation and reduction of those releases and quantifying those releases as well.
Great. Scott.
Well, I think that I'll echo Christine's plea for more data. EDF, of course, is organizing an initiative to try to get permission to come to industrial facilities, real facilities, and do the tracer release type measurement. And so I think an appeal, what is needed is to get some industry participation. And EDF is, I believe, planning to make any concessions necessary to make that happen.
You didn't hear that from me, but yes, we're flexible. Dave, what
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah, so I'll be optimistic. I'm actually not too worried about the technological side advancements that we need. I think we've always done a pretty good job of overcoming those hurdles, technically speaking. We've got a lot of smart people on our side to be able to kind of push forward to different projects, you know, speaking of people in DOE and things like that. One hurdle that I feel like I see more than not that I think we'll need to overcome is kind of this disconnect between research and industry. And so it might look something like making sure we can bring the industrial standards up to what we're talking about here, right? Making sure that these environmental concerns with whether it be small leaks, big leaks, right? We're bringing industry up to these standards. And then on the flip side of that, we're bringing researchers up to the practicality of what industry is asking for, right? And so I think that's maybe a hurdle to look towards, is making sure we can kind of bring those two together in the future.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right, well, we have around 7 minutes for questions. We'll take one from the audience over here.
Hi, I'm Tracy.
I think they're going to get you a
Waiting for a
mic.
mic.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tracy Google. I am founder and CEO of Infinite Hydrogen. Hi, thank you. This is a question for Christine Watson. You had mentioned about the International Climate Emissions Task Force, and I just wanted to know, is that a recent initiative that started, or is it coming out? Has it already come out? It's new to me, and I want to get more information on it. So we'd love to participate with that.
So it is the International Partnership for Hydrogen Fuel Cells in the Economy. It is an intergovernmental organization, so it's strictly government to government. And they have posted on their website a position statement on the hydrogen emissions topic. And then this task force is starting, as we speak, we're forming it and working out the scope for it.
Can you point me to the website to go to?
I believe it is
Come find me after and I'll give you
IPHE.net.
Your card.
It's
How's that?
IPHE.net.
Okay, thank you.
Who else has a question? Anyone? We were super thorough. Answered all of your questions on hydrogen emissions. Great.
Hi, thank you so much. I guess one question I have for all of you are, how much more work do you think is needed in understanding biogeochemical cycles related to hydrogen emissions? And so how much ends up in the atmosphere, how much goes into soil, and where are we on that front?
I can answer that because that is part of our interagency agreement with NOAA. And the soil bacteria that consume hydrogen were just discovered a few years ago. So this is very brand new science. And the quantification of how much hydrogen are the soil bacteria consuming, that's a huge range. And because that's such a large range, as well as the quantification of how much hydrogen is actually being released into the atmosphere from anthropogenic activities, those numbers are too large to have a precise estimate, to have a really confident and precise estimate of hydrogen's impact on climate change. And so we need to have more research on those areas. You've really picked those out well. And then as far as specifically the bacterial consumption of hydrogen, we have some preliminary results from our researchers at Princeton University that show that it depends on the type of land, whether it's soil or sand, how sensitive those bacteria are to moisture. But then the question also becomes, how sensitive are they to temperature? How sensitive to global warming? As moisture patterns change, as temperature changes, do the soil bacteria consume more hydrogen or less hydrogen? It depends also where in the world they are, southern hemisphere versus northern hemisphere. There are a lot of factors that go into it and a huge amount of unknowns in that area.
Yeah, I agree. Like, more research and more data is always needed, especially on this front when we're sort of on the precipice of such major investments. The research teams that are working on soil systems and many of their other sort of atmospheric chemist peers they came out with a multi-model study a few months ago that found that there is enough consensus around the global warming impact of hydrogen that it's sort of good enough to use in policy decision making in the meantime. So we think it's, we have enough certainty that there is a climate impact that we need to account for. And then the other piece is, like we mentioned, there's a lot of operational, huge releases that we know are happening and definitely make a big dent in the...
Morgan, may I add something? We actually kicked somebody out of their office at Aerodyne in order to turn it into a grow room where we've installed probes to look at what's happening in the subsurface at the same time we're seeing what's happening in what's getting up to the air above. So it is really exciting kind of research. If we could just get our instrument to go a little bit faster, we might be able to do actual eddy covariance.
Yeah. I mean, I thought you were going to say you fired someone.
No.
So at least you just relocated them.
Relocated, yeah.
Great. Maybe one more question? Or did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess my question was kind of getting at, how much do you think new sensor development can help answer some of these fundamental science questions, not undermining the global warming potential, but just actually better understanding of the entire cycle?
I couldn't hear the question.
How much will the sensors help solve that question, or provide more insight into this question?
I think a few years from now, we're going to have a completely refreshed understanding of the heterogeneity of what's taking place underground.
And if I could just add, the reverse is also a question as well, is because previously at NREL I'd worked with NOAA taking samples at the Flatiron facility with parts revealing measurement, but not with any kind of instrument like that. And we actually got told, make sure there's no construction anywhere around, because even something as simple as a car driving down a road can be enough to stir up gravel and emit hydrogen. And so your question's interesting because it goes both ways. I think we can influence overall kind of what it is we think and what it is that we're learning about the environmental mechanisms by which hydrogen goes away, but it also might be affecting our measurements too.
Well, thank you all so much, and thank you panelists for joining me and educating me about what we're doing on leakage detection. We'll be available, or at least a few of us will be available for a few minutes after this panel if you want to ask us any other questions.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Cool.